So this is our Wednesday evening Kehillah adult education class. Some of us have been anchoring this space for months and months, most Wednesday evenings, learning Torah, learning bits of Talmud, learning Jewish history, learning bits on Israel-Palestine, all sorts of things. And we've been really blessed with some wonderful guest speakers, both from within and outside the community. And we're really lucky to have a community member with us tonight who's bringing a special expertise and also just something that's very fascinating, and I think will be fascinating to a lot of the folks in this group. I feel like it's an overlap of literature and interest in gender identity that I certainly am interested in, and I think some people here already share. And also I just think other people are interested specifically in all the work and writing you've done on it, Lipika. So I just wanted to introduce Lipika very briefly and then hand it over. So Lipika worked in the BBC newsroom for over a decade and also reported from the Middle East, North Africa, and Asia. In 2005 to 2013, she lived in Jerusalem, where she learned Hebrew, made several award-winning documentary films, one of which, Deadly Honor, about honor killing among the urbanized Bedouins in the Israeli city of Ramla, was aired on Israel's Channel 1 television. Lipika has written 3 books: In Jerusalem, on the Amstel, Quest for Zion in the Dutch Republic, in Jerusalem, on the Amstel, Lipika first explored the theme of passing, or transmutations of identity for opportunity and adventure. And then her latest book, Passing, An Alternative History of Identity, published in January this year, reflects on tales of fluidity and transformation. It documents a timely history of the self. Tonight, Lipika is going to explore with us the concept of passing within the context of Judaism, with biblical and Talmudic references to gender diversity and how that may have influenced authors, in particular, Isaac Bashevis Singer, who used Yiddish folk tales to reinterpret Jewish religious teachings. So we're going to have some readings, some musical interludes, stories of non-binary behavior, intersectionality of sex and gender passing, and sexual wantonness of both humans and demons. With such an exciting blurb, I pass it over to you, Lipika. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Leah. It was, some of the stuff that I'll talk about tonight, I have written about in my latest book, Passing: An Alternative History of Identity. But I've also studied Singer quite passionately throughout the writing of the book, but very little of that research actually went into the actual book. So I'm really glad to have this opportunity to talk about all the, let's say, edited out scenes from the book, if we can use the kind of cinematic imagery to describe the edited out scenes. So let's go into the discussion. It will be divided into 2 parts. The first part, I will talk about Talmudic and biblical references to sort of gender identity, gender diversity, and which will then move on to Singer. And we'll have a little break. After that, I will read from my book, where I have analyzed and discussed Singer's work and his life. In Mishnah Bikurim, a gender fluid person is described as this: an androgynous who represents himself or herself or themselves, both male and female physical traits, is in some ways like men and in some ways like women. In some ways, they're like both men and women, and in other ways, like neither man nor women. And in the first chapter of the Tanakh, we have God created Adam in his image, and in the image of God, he created him. Male and female, God created them. This is from Genesis 1, chapter 26, verse 26 to 27. So what do we understand from these passages? That gender diversity was part of the divine plan, that it is a spectrum through which many images of God are revealed. The Genesis clearly implies that God created man in his image. And as we have heard, the first man is androgynous, containing both male and female traits. And those traits are also God's own. And this is why divine presence, or Shekhinah, is a feminine word in Hebrew. Jewish mystical traditions, or the Kabbalah, are full of gendered souls, or souls that are distinctly fluid. The transition from male to female to male. It has been suggested that Jacob's daughter Dinah was conceived with the soul of a man. The Kabbalah also teaches that Abraham's son Isaac was ensouled as a woman, who then was born as a man, so the covenant with Abraham could be carried out. These transitioning souls into different gendered bodies are known in Jewish mystical tradition as Gilgul HaNeshamot, rotating souls, which again can remind us of the Hindu doctrine of reincarnation. On a practical level, this Gilgul can be seen as an expression of gender fluid identity, a reference that some rabbinical texts have used to include Jewish transgender community. This argument has been facilitated, of course, by the existence in Talmudic texts at least 6 different genders, as well as normative male and female. We also have A, androgynous, containing both male and female traits, B, tumtum, whose biological sex is unclear or intersex, C, Ilonit, one who is born with female sex organ, but who develops male traits in puberty, which reminds us of the biological condition called 5-alpha reductase deficiency, or 5-ARD, popularized in the novel Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. Finally, Saris, opposite of Ilonit, one who is born as male but develops female sex traits. Gender identity, and therefore gender passing, is ages old. Throughout history, there have been many who found themselves in between society's understanding of male or female identity, whether by choice or by nature, momentarily or fundamentally. Literature, art, and religion are full of gender bending and gender crossing stories. Myths in all cultures involve quite random sex changes, according to the divine will and whim. Indian mythology is inundated with cross-gender incarnations of gods as well as humans. Ancient Greco-Roman literature is similarly full of such transformations, both of godly creatures themselves and imposed by them on hapless men and women, the mockers and the mocked in the divine and earthly orbits. One of the best known works of classical literature, a mock epic for that matter, is Ovid's Metamorphoses, a vast work consisting of 15 books under the common theme of mythological transformation. We see gods and humans turned out not just from mortal to divine and vice versa, but to animal, tree, stone, and frequently between man and woman, in a complex navigation of rape and escape, bondage and freedom, lechery and debauchery, transgression and punishment, consciousness and oblivion. I cannot talk about tales of fluidity and transformation in life and in art without borrowing many of these themes from one of the most magnificent writers of the 20th century. He is Isaac Bashevis Singer, who wrote in Yiddish. His characters frequently step between lines, between assigned and assumed selves. Singer grew up with a rich Ashkenazi Jewish tradition, with a strong dose of Kabbalistic teachings in Poland in the early 20th century. It is therefore hardly surprising that the author would make use of Judaism's possibilities of genders and sexual identities as he wrote about life in the ghetto within the confines of normativity. In his gender and sex passing stories, Singer frequently uses religious Jewish texts to portray deeply pious characters who fall between the cracks of binaries. He uses Yiddish folktales as a vehicle to reinterpret Jewish teachings about sexuality and gender norms. Singer's contribution to Jewish culture through these folklores is unmatched. And I quote from Leah Trachtenberg's Yiddish porn. These brought a sense of the old world of Ashkenazi Jewry to a society grappling with the tragedy of Russian pogroms and the Holocaust. The most famous of these stories that many of you already know of is Yentl, the Yeshiva Boy. Yentl is the daughter of a single father, and when her father dies, she, the scholar of the Talmud and the Torah, leaves her town, passes as a man, Anshel, and joins a yeshiva so she can continue her studies. Singer leaves it ambiguous, as in his other stories, such as Disguised, that we'll talk about later, whether or not Yentl Anshel has gender dysphoria, or they're just passing as the opposite sex because that is the only way they can be authentic to themselves. Singer tells us that Yentl Anshel has the body of a woman and soul of a man, which is what gender dysphoria refers to. But it also brings to mind the real meaning of Shekhinah, the divine presence that is described by using the feminine word, therefore implying God's feminine attributes. But obviously something happened to upset the traditional view of Shekhinah, which splits soul and body evenly, where each soul must correspond to its designated gender. But in a very Singer-esque style, the Shekhinah is truly genderqueer in this story, which presents us Yentl Anshel as neither a man nor a woman. My question is Yentl then a biologically assigned woman after a selfhood that is queer? Just as Mishnah Bikurim states, these are the ways in which they are like a man. And in this context, we should explain with the Bikurim text and the tractate in the Talmud. There are usually kind of 3 chapters, and the 4th chapter is often added to it. Rabbi Leah, you must correct me if I've got it wrong. So the first 3 chapters are all about taking fruit to the temple during Sukkot, and so then the description is about how men will take the fruit, first fruits, bikurim, first fruits to the temple, how women should take these fruits, and how also converted Jews should be taking these fruits to the temple. And then the discussion comes: what about people who don't show the visible traits of male traits or female traits? So how do we include these people? That's when the 4th chapter of Bikurim sort of is added to it, where where to make room for gender fluid people who should also be allowed to take the first fruits, bikurim, to the temple. So these are the ways, this kind of is explained in this passage I've just read. These are the ways in which they're like a man, or these are the ways in which they're like a woman. So Yentl Anshel, in their first-person narrative, presents a gap between soul and body, and a misunderstanding of their physical self, a Singer tour de force that preempted postmodern identity quest. By making his readers sympathetic to these characters, Singer actually makes a case for non-normative sexuality and gender expressions, and communicates this successfully to both his Gentile and Jewish audiences. Another interesting and recurring theme in Singer's works is the barren or abandoned woman motif, which often intersects with the phantasmagorical, sexual, and gender passing of characters who often share the same space. So in a minute, we'll listen to some music. I should get my ready. So we will be talking about one of his most famous stories about intersectional passing here, you will see, including man passing as demon or dibuk. And the story is called Taibele and her demon. In Taibele and her demon, a deserted wife is passing as a sexually liberated new woman with her new partner, a village misfit who seduces her, passing as a demon. The story is based on a Polish-Jewish erotic fable and is full of sexual deviances, fantasies of adultery by sexually starved agunas, abandoned wives, their secret dalliances with nightly visitors. So let's hear the first piece of music. It's by Laurie Wolf. She's a Canadian jazz singer, poet, drummer, and she adapted Kehillah and her demon to this amazing, beautiful musical piece. We'll hear the first track called Aguna.
That the heart cannot reveal to the lips. They are carried to the grave. The willows murmur of them. The crows caw about them. The gravestones converse about them silently, in the language of stone. They called me an aguna, a deserted wife. When the townsfolk told me that my husband had left, it was too late to catch up with him. He was already across the river. I had sent a messenger to seek him out. But neither my husband nor the messenger was ever seen again. At 33, I found myself childless and without a husband.
In a Polish-Jewish village about 100 years ago lived Kehillah, a beautiful woman who loved stories of sexual adventure involving biblical demons and abandoned women. She was an aguna herself. One day, she was entertaining a shocked audience of women in her village with a story where a fellow aguna was seduced by a demon passing as a man who married her. We'll hear now from the second piece of her, Laurie Wolf's Kehillah and her demon. It's called Moonless Night.
One moonless summer evening, when the town was as dark as Egypt, I sat with my friends on the bench, telling them a tale I had read in a book bought from a peddler. It was about a young woman and a demon who had ravished her and lived with her as man and wife. I recounted the story in all its details. We huddled closer together, joined hands, spat to ward off evil, and laughed, the kind of laughter that comes from fear. We discussed the young woman's choices. Why didn't she exorcise him with an amulet? Not every demon is frightened of amulets. Because the demon warned her that he would choke her if she revealed the secret. They all cried, "Woe is me! May no one know of such things. I'll be afraid to go home now. I'll walk with you."
So an old widower in the village, a teacher's help, Al-Hanan, is much amused hearing this story, hiding in Taibala's yard. And he devises an ingenious plan. One evening, when Taibala is asleep, Al-Hanan enters her room and into her bed. As he seduces her and makes love to her, Taibala, who at first resists the demon, who introduces himself as Humiza, reciprocates Al-Hanan's overtures of love and lust. She even makes herself believe Al-Hanan's claim that her husband is dead, thus freeing her, of course, of mating another man. Though she accepts marriage to a demon passing as a lover in her bed every night is out of question even for a woman fascinated by the dark world of passion, promiscuity, and subversion of conventional sexual morality. Singer here leaves his readers with the dilemma, whether or not they should feel sympathy for who might have been deemed as a morally loose woman who justifies her need for company and sexual satisfaction. We'll hear now from monologue 1 from Taibale and Her Demon by Laurie Wolfe.
After my friends departed, I thought about the weird tale. Despicable as a demon must be, this one treated her kindly, and an aguna is a woman, after all. She has a heart with love to give and cannot be choosy, as she is forced to live alone. Perhaps I am somewhat of a demon myself. I've become one who sees without being seen. People speak about me and hope that I will not hear them. I'm pitied, yet kept at arm's length. The world keeps turning and I am forced to stand still, unable to reclaim my past or create a new future. As a child, I was warned of the demons that walk the earth. It is said that they could read minds and my thoughts could be mistaken for intention. We leave the doors unlocked. Thieves are unheard of in this town. Our hearts are shut tight.
Isaac Bashevis Singer's work is full of these allusions to unorthodox human, cross-gender, human-demon liaisons, where his characters are passing as people they were not assigned to be, and often having a roaring laugh as they hoodwink society. Their sexual need takes precedence over the halakhic prohibition of extramarital relationships. So we'll listen to the final part of Taibala and Her Demon. It's monologue 2, followed by Tango for Taibala.
I was almost asleep when suddenly I saw a figure standing, hovering in the shadows. I was too terrified to utter a sound. The demon stepped forward, looming before me in the darkness. He spoke in a hollow voice. "Don't scream, Taibala. If you cry out, I will destroy you. I am a demon, ruler over darkness, rain, hail, thunder, and wild beasts. I am the evil spirit who espoused the young woman you spoke of tonight. And because you told the story with such relish, I heard your words from the abyss and was filled with desire for you. The demon went on with his persuasions, some sweet, some threatening. He invoked the names of angels and devils, of demonic beasts and vampires. He swore that Asmodeus, king of the demons, was his step-uncle. He said that Lilith, queen of the evil spirits, danced for him on one foot and did every manner of thing to please him. The she-devil who stole babies from women in childbed baked poppy seed cakes for him in hell's ovens and leavened them with the fat of wizards and black dogs. Hearing these words, I lay motionless, as in a swoon. My heart fluttered and seemed to stop. I thought my end had come. After a while, I gathered courage and murmured, "What do you want of me? I am a married woman." The demon sneered, "Your husband is dead." I followed in his funeral procession myself. He warned me not to divulge to anyone what had befallen me, or even hint at it, on pain of dire punishment. He would pluck out the hair from my skull, pierce my eyes. He would cast me into a desolate wilderness, red as stone and water as blood, where the wailing of the fallen is heard all day and all night.
As if the transgression of Kehillah wasn't enough, Singer thereon embarks on a more controversial theme of the destruction of a Jewish marriage and the elopement of a rabbi's wife with a pig butcher's son from a neighboring house. The Riddle, a short story, takes place on a Yom Kippur Eve, where we meet Isaac Bashevis, a young rabbi who goes to the synagogue in the morning, has himself flogged for unlisted sins, gives to the poor, but throughout the day, he feels sexually aroused by thinking of his wife, another childless woman, Kehillah. He thinks of Kehillah's description of collective mikveh, a ritual bath with other village women. In both stories, Singer manipulates the stigma around barrenness in Jewish tradition and the circumstantial futility of the commandment for procreation for heterosexual couples. These stories preempt a modern feminist rebellion against the tradition where women are to bear the blame of childlessness and it being seen as a fault of women only. So these barren women then carry out the most spectacular acts of sexual wantonness and transgression. Singer evoked Eastern European Jewish folk memory and mystical traditions to present characters to whom life was an ambush. Another story that is considered as a masterpiece of intersectional sex, gender, and sociocultural passing is Disguised, where we have it all. An abandoned wife leaving her hometown to track down her husband so she can get a get in order to remarry. Her husband, a yeshiva student who may or may not be transgender, who may or may not be sex passing. He may be cross-dressing. And the third non-normative character is their husband, who is an openly gay yeshiva student. I will read from my book, Passing, and that just came out in January. And how to put it there? Here I talk about and discuss Singer's work and the characters that we find here as kind of both gender and sex passing. And this concerns his short story called Disguise, which was actually published in the New Yorker in 1986. So Isaac Bashevis Singer's Disguised is about a young yeshiva student, Pinchasel, who marries a rich, beautiful young woman, Tamarol, according to their parents' wishes. However, within a month of their traditional religious wedding, Pinchasel disappears. Tamarol, both families, and the couple's friends fail to understand why a nice young Hasidic man would do such a thing, particularly as his bride would not be able to remarry under Jewish law until he divorced her, or unless she could prove that he was dead. When Tamarol turns 19, she sets off with a maid from her little hometown to travel around Greater Poland in search of Pinchasel. She stops at many places until she arrives in a town called Kehillah, where she sees a woman buying eggs in a marketplace. The woman looks vaguely familiar. She bears a strange resemblance to Tamarol's lost husband. And when Tamarol notices that the woman's face is not smooth, that she has fuzzy facial hair, perhaps a beard, she realizes that this is no woman, this is Pinchasel. Tamarol chases after him into a rundown muddy alley. The long-lost spouse admits in an emotional voice, "Yes, I am Pinchasel, Tamarol." Tamarol, in her bewilderment, asks, "Are you mad, possessed by a dibuk?" In Jewish folklore, a dibuk is a wily wandering spirit, like the jinn in Islamic folklore. It takes over the body of a morally weak mortal. Pinchasel explains that she, the pronoun used by Singer, is living in Kehillah with a man. At this, Tamarol expresses utter shock and repeats, "With a man?" To which Pinchasel says, "I'm not a man anymore. Not really, not for you." They walk together to Pinchasel's house. Sitting there with a glass of soda and homemade pretzel, Tamarol learns more about the woman who was once her husband. Now she sees a strange kind of sisterhood welling up inside her as Pinchasel introduces Tamarol to Elkanah, a fellow yeshiva scholar, and the man Pinchasel now lives with. The two has eloped and found truth in the little town of Kehillah, where they lived as man and wife. Tamarol stoically hears the person still legally her husband say that she never wanted to marry her. It was always Elkanah that Pinchasel was in love with. In Deuteronomy, cross-dressing is a most profane act for a Jew, but tired of living with lies in a false marriage, Pinchasel has finally decided to come out of his closet. But this isn't a triumphant declaration to the world as we often understand coming out today. The philosopher of sex, Raja Halwani, explains this. Explains what the closet actually means in this context. The closet can have two functions. In the case of an individual trying to determine her life in a homophobic society, the closet can function as a protective shield, especially when important goods are delivered. But in cases in which the only reason for hiding is shame, the closet functions perniciously. It assaults the dignity of the individual, renders her identity invisible, compromises her integrity, and has the net effect of forcing her to lead a morally compromised life. Pinchasel has effectively come out of one of these closets, but not the other. Married to Tamarol, while in love with Elkanah, he was deeply anguished by this morally compromised life. He left to live with his lover in a personal embracing of gayness, but the only way they could share this life was as man and wife. To justify this decision to remain socially in the closet, Pinchasel, once a devout student of the Jewish rabbinical seminary, refers to the Talmud, explaining to Tamarol the double meaning of cross-dressing as a source of both shame and liberation. So he says to Tamarol, according to the Talmud, when a man is overcome by the evil spirit and knows of no way out, he should wrap himself up in black garments and go to a place where he is not known and do what his heart desires. This is what we did, Elkanah and I. Where straight passing requires some kind of gender passing, then this can complicate the morally and normally one-way direction of passing, from an underprivileged status to a privileged one. In crossing over to a female persona, Kehillah has gone from life as a man enriched by his wife's dowry to a life as a poor pretzel seller. And by invoking her religious text to defend his secret relationship, Kehillah defies any simplistic idea of the moral imperative to come out of the closet in order to be true to oneself. Everything about this choice of new self raises challenging questions about the nature of integrity or a true self or authenticity for the character. Singer's short story covers a whole range of identity shifts, and he addresses head-on the ways in which these come together in a morally complicated tale of transformation. These interactions and dilemmas mean that sometimes individuals prefer to remain ambiguous. Kehillah comments to Tamarol, I'm not a man anymore, not really, not for you, leaves the reader wondering, is he a gay man or a trans woman? You know for sure that by marrying Tamarol under social pressure, Kehillah had been passing as straight. But was he also passing as a cis man? Singer leaves the answer tantalizingly vague, as if to say, is this character's gender identity really important? Why do you feel you need to know the answer in order to understand them or their story? If Kehillah feels within herself that her chosen exile is an authentic life, can't we just take her word for it? Nobody's business but theirs. So I will end tonight's talk with a short conclusion, reflecting on what I understood from what Singer tried to do and what we should learn from his stories and his reflection on his drawing on Jewish life and what he actually tried to convey, Jewish cultural tradition and what he tried to convey from that. So the excerpts and examples from Singer and Jewish religious texts teach us that there are no absolute markers to measure our being or belonging. They just help us to explore and understand what makes us who we are. The fictional world Singer created spoke poignantly to the fears, longings, and ambivalence of those assimilating into American society. He was writing in Yiddish, living in an apartment on Manhattan's Upper West Side, drawing on a statal culture that you would think was worlds away from the morally ambiguous post-war America. The energies of sexual and moral code breakers are pulsing just beneath the surface of a puritanical ghetto consciousness. Singer was a staunch anti-assimilationist in the American context, in the cultural melting pot that it became, which the author saw as a trap. Assimilation into normativity privileged only those who passed up successfully. Passing is only passing when it is successful eraser of identity. The Singer's view is echoed in today's self-determination of minority communities, Jews, Blacks, Muslims, queer, and other identity groups. Understanding diverse realities as real evidently challenges normative hierarchies that have been historically used to define a pure race, superior civilization, normal or regular gender and sexuality. Supporting all kinds of movements for self-determination, from Black Lives Matter to trans liberation, can be seen as a Jewish cause, because the same hierarchy of race was applied to Jews by the racial supremacists in the name of science. So the world over, the struggle for self-definition or new self-definition continues the way it always has. When identity is no longer compartmentalized the way tradition compelled it, there are endless possibilities and parallel realities for those of us who combine many belongings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lipika. I think there's going to be some good questions that come out of this. So now this is the time really where we can sit and ask questions. I think Lipika is, you've brought a lot of knowledge about a very a really interesting piece of the pie of Yiddish literature, certainly, and of how sacred texts might feed into that, and how contemporary culture overlapped with his life, and contemporary culture as we know it, I suppose. I was really interested in all of that, and so people, please, what are your questions? You can either unmute yourself, or if people want to come back onto video, that would be nice and communal, so we can all hear each other and have a bit of a discussion and ask questions.
So, like, what drew you into these kinds of topics in the first place? Because, like, I wouldn't even know where to start with stuff like this.
It started with my research into Singer's work for my passing book. In the end, I only used a short section, as you heard, analyzing his short story Disguised, which is mainly about sort of intersectional gender and sex passing. But I sort of read probably most of his work during this research. I became so fascinated that I would stay up night after night. I would be reading and won't be able to put down. So I've sort of bought the entire collection of Singer. And it just quite incredible. He was a prolific writer and wrote so many books. Kind of countless books on from mainly kind of this portraying this unorthodox inner soul in a very traditional Ashkenazi Jewish community in Poland in the late 19th and early 20th century, and it's so much so that I even thought of learning Polish and Yiddish, because although his characters usually don't speak Polish, but there will be always Gentile characters like the pork butcher's son, and there are other kind of Gentile characters. There is this servant. There's another story which I was going to kind of touch upon tonight. It's called The Destruction of Khrushchev, it's about a rabbi who then forces his wife to sleep with the husband, and then that brings upon a catastrophe over this town of Khrushchev. And in the end, they all have to go out and repent for their various sins. And you don't know where Singer even stands in this. So what I like about his stories and his position, his views, is that he doesn't actually take a position. He lets the reader to decide whether they sympathize with the characters. And if they do sympathize, then should an aguna assume that husband who deserted her might be dead, actually, and that she can then sleep with whoever she likes? Or there are some other kind of dilemmas that these characters face. And in The Destruction of Khrushchev, for example, the wife then does sleep with the servant, and to kind of make her husband happy, because this rabbi, again, he's possessed by a demon. We learn afterwards there are lots of demons here, so lots of kind of unorthodox behavior. Singer then tries to blame on this Jewish folklore of demonic presence and demonic influence. So then this woman then sleeps with the servant, and then she actually falls in love with the servant. And that's when the rabbi husband gets very upset and jealous. And that's when he confesses. He goes to the synagogue and confesses this is what his wife had done, this is what he'd done, and then they all repent. And this woman then is dressed up as a witch and paraded through the town and humiliated. So it just kind of opened up this whole new world of Polish Jewish ghetto life, which I had no idea, like you, Natasha, I had no idea existed. And obviously, Singer exaggerated and took literary license to create these characters, and probably, let his imagination kind of go wild. But I just love that about him. At the same time, he refused to fully assimilate into American culture, and he actually wrote only in Yiddish until later in life, when he co-wrote some of his stories in English with a co-writer.
Sorry, can I just
Jackie, hi.
I thought it was very interesting that you said you didn't know anything about that kind of life, because I started reading Isaac Bashevis Singer in my early 20s, and up at that time, I mean, I knew about my immediate Jewish family and everything. I've got two big Jewish families, but it was always my grandma would say I came from Poland, and that's as far as it went. It's almost like a block. And Isaac Bashevis Singer, to me, opened up this whole world of that Jews were they weren't only living in ghettos, they were also living in little shtetls. They were, and it was their everyday lives, and they were mixing with neighbors who weren't Jewish, and they had, there were rich people, poor people, lumberjacks, all sorts of characters. It was wonderful, and to me, it brought back that. Obviously, there were problems and persecutions at times, but a lot of the other time, people were just living their lives as well as they could, it's just a huge kaleidoscope. So it's lovely hearing you're kind of coming in from another perspective. But I just think it's wonderful.
Yeah, glad you mentioned the living with the neighbors.
Yeah.
So I before I started reading Singer, I thought that they lived in the Jewish ghetto and only Jews lived there, as and ghettos in various other countries represent that the Jewish ghettos would be a gated community of only Jews. But in Poland, actually, the ghetto life, for example, the story the Riddle, where the rabbi's wife who elopes with pork butcher's son. The pork butcher's son lives just opposite. And it's interesting with Singer, without making any kind of judgmental comment, he describes the neighborhood where he talks about this every day. They open the windows and they see the big sort of chunks of meat and pork being kind of carted away from the neighborhood. So there was this kind of the most offensive act that that a Jewish family can watch, like pigs being butchered just opposite and taken away and carted away. And that is the kind of neighborhood he talks about. And so the proximity of the kind of the Gentile and Jews, it just is mind-blowing. I had no idea that they lived like that.
Yeah.
And then I sort of got more fascinated, because so what is kind of traditional and what is not? Because although they lived a traditional life, but there is always this tension of of sexual promiscuity or sexual adventure, and also kind of breaking the kind of religious kind of dietary laws, and it was happening all the time. And also kind of women who sort of takes revenge, in this way, by going against this kind of traditional confinement and going off doing all sorts of things and following, and there's a lot of travelers here. All of Singer's stories are full of female travelers. So their husbands desert, and they're just abandoned. Husbands abandon them, but they don't just sit there waiting for them. So many of these characters, they actually leave and they travel for weeks and weeks and weeks looking for their husbands so they can get the get, so they can remarry. So they didn't want to stop life. So this kind of thirst for life and thirst for continuity is amazing in his work. Yeah. That they would never give up, because we want to remarry, we want to have children, we don't want to stay childless, barren.
I was just wondering where that quote that you said about passing being like an erasure of identity, was that you, or was that Singer, or was that like a combination?
That was mine. That was mine.
It's a beautiful quote. It really resonated with me. Thank you.
I was wondering, it's a very broad question, but I know I feel like there's an intersection here that I was wondering what you had to say about it, Lipika, which is between Yiddish and queer culture. I know Fran Kurlansky, who some people in this room know, who's a new member of Kehillah. She's doing her master's at UCL right now, and what she wants to do, her master's on, her thesis or dissertation, I always, as a US person, forget which is which here in the UK, but whatever the master's big thing is, she wants to do it on the intersection between queer and Yiddish culture in the UK as it's happening now, because there's been this reclamation of Yiddishkeit, of Yiddish culture, and it has overlapped and intersected. You can see it like in things like Homos and Hummus and Pink Peacock and other places with a queer lens, and also sometimes a radical or anarchist bent, and all of this. I'm just interested, like, in all this you're doing, there's so much of that intersection. And when you've been reading and doing this research and doing this writing, do you think, why does that seem to be something that those two things keep getting intertwined? Do you have any wisdom on that, I guess?
I just think that this new this quest for identity and self-determination, I think it is not just a kind of Jewish Yiddish community. It's also, we have seen that, amongst other minority groups, and sort of, African people of African origins and of Asian origins and of Muslim, Jewish, origins, and they sort of somehow that's coming out to say that don't be ashamed, to say who you are somehow, just to kind of proclaim your identity. As I've said, that, we've been trying to assimilate into a culture which was mainstream. So let's stop trying to pass as mainstream. So to be who we are, and then let the mainstream come to us. So this is like a new self-perception, post-colonial and post World War II identity questions, and we're just seeing it from all directions, not just from the Yiddish Jewish community, or not just from the Muslim community. We are seeing it from other minority communities. There is a space. I'm not sure the space is safe yet, not completely safe, I don't think, but there is a space which is in the open, and where we can just come out and say who we are, which wasn't possible until let's say about 20 years ago even.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's something about, I'm going to claim my distinctiveness, and sit in my spot, and people are going to come to me. That's really an interesting frame. Thank you.
And the Jews, mainly for Ashkenazi Jews, it was easy to pass as mainstream Christian Anglo-Saxon group, and that sort of, in a way, that erased, part of the Jewish identity. Yes. And now there is this time to actually reclaim that, say, no, we don't want to do this, sort of looking alike doesn't make us like you. I have my distinct identity, and I would like to preserve that.
You were talking before about how Singer's life, in a way, he was opposed to assimilation in the United States, and his work portrays that. Could you say a bit more about why you think that and what he did?
Yeah, I think I'd like to kind of there is kind of something I wanted to read from his just one second. I wanted to read from a sort of a passage that his brother wrote in a, I'm just trying to find, the singer's brother wrote about the family, so where Singer got his inspiration from, obviously, from his neighborhood and from the close proximity of Jews and Gentiles, and also his own family. So there is this a book called The Passing Game, and there Singer's brother writes, they would have been a well-mated couple. He writes about their Singer's parents. They would have been a well-mated couple if she had been the husband and he the wife. Even externally, each seemed better suited for the other's role. Father was short and round with a soft, fine, delicate face, warm blue eyes, full rosy cheeks, a small chiseled nose, and plump feminine hands. If not for the great reddish-brown beard and corkscrew-like side locks, he would have resembled a woman. Mother, on the other hand, was tall and somewhat stooped, with large, piercing, cold grey eyes, a sharp nose, and a jutting, pointed chin like a man's. So we can see that the whole kind of gender-bending physical traits he saw in his own family. And so for inspiration to write about gender-bending stories, he didn't have to go very far. And then he comes with this rich culture to America. And there is this, of course, the post-war, in post-war America, he came actually in the 1930s. And many of his families then, or neighbors and acquaintances then came to join him after, or his own kind of close group after the war. And then there was this immense pressure on the East European Jewish community to assimilate and to behave like, fall into this normative confinement, and not just in terms of cultural identity, but also sexual and gender identity. But Singer refused, because someone who comes from such rich culture with where they even talk about their parents as performing different gender roles, how can he possibly then fall into this cis heteronormative context that American society propagated? So he refused. Incredible. I mean, you must have read, Enemies, it's a short story, and there are so many stories. Some of them have been made into films, and there's a lot more to still kind of discover and talked about, and we must, it's sort of, somehow I think that there is this kind of new Singer-esque sort of reincarnation somehow, because in the modern, so many postmodern identity quests are aligned with Singer-esque views of life. And somehow, when he was writing in the set, when he was actually being published or translated into English in the 1970s, then we first kind of came to him because he'd been writing throughout his life, all in Yiddish, and then he became famous in the 70s and got Nobel Prize for Literature, and that's when the world came to learn about his amazing world. And it's such a powerful world that he was never compelled to write in English, and he never felt the need to write in English. And it's this incredible defiance and cultural pride, and we should all learn from.
Sure.
I don't know if it's a question, but are you, in Eastern Yiddish life, it was often the women who were the ones who went out to work in the market stalls, while the men were studying, or they were beggars, or, you know, I mean, at different times there was different things. So I thought that that was one of the things that was very difficult when Jews then emigrated to, say, America, where, and especially after the war, you know, after the war, where women were told to go back to their homes and they should be there, and it's the men who go out to work and have to be sporty, and that wasn't the tradition at all from where they'd come from.
Yeah, that's true. And he writes about those kind of conflicted characters in many of his stories. And you know, an enemy is a love story that in one of his it's been made into a film, and it's great, where again, you know, this kind of he has three women, one who he hid him in a hayloft during the Nazi occupation of Poland, and and then finally, when they manage to escape, he marries this Gentile woman who helped him hide in the hayloft, who was actually a servant in their home. So they come to America, and then suddenly his wife who turns up, and then he has a lover as well. But you see this the lover finds it very difficult because she is working here, and the main character here, who is a writer, who obviously is drawn. This character is drawn after Singer's own kind of himself, and so the character is struggling to make money, and you see the lover. So there are three women here. So the lover is actually is the one who is working and then paying for holidays. They're going away, and so that life somehow, to some extent, continues. And so women worked not only in factories, and women also, we forget that they were also working as social sort of revolutionary workers. So there's this kind of communist movements. It's a love story, and the wife was actually a young communist, and then she was sent to Russia, and was in a camp, and Stalin's camp there, and in one of the labor camps, and so for her, work was this kind of it's somehow that was the main thing, whereas the writer, the main character, well, the main male character in the film, in the book, is struggling to make ends meet, whereas all these three women, they had different jobs. So one was a communist and a worker back home, and then she comes to New York, and then again immediately she opens a bookshop and works to save money, enough money to take her lover on holiday, and or husband actually on holiday, and the lover also works, and the Polish Gentile woman who helped him hide in the hayloft is also working. You know, without any education, she also manages to get jobs. So women always worked in all the women in Singer's stories, they always work. And that's another kind of amazingly liberating thing to see and to learn from. And as I've sort of mentioned earlier, that they're also great travelers. And so when an abandoned wife travels, into Greater Poland in search of the lost husband, and there are amazing passages describing her journeys through sort of weeks of like, so there's kind of women take kind of a small bag of sort of essentials, and then they sleep in fields and beg in Gentile homes in order to get food, and then they go to one rabbi to another in order to get this decree, signed by someone that they can marry again. So it was so important for them to actually continue life and not just sit there like Penelope and pine for this lost Odysseus. There's nothing. Jewish women didn't do that in Poland.
Well, thank you so much, Lipika. This has left me, I think, in a way that maybe you intended, with more questions than answers. It makes me want to go read Singer and go read more of, the various genders that are mentioned in the Gemara, and really kind of understand what's going. I don't think I will, but try to get a grips on, what's going on in all those various places. And I think if I'll take anything from this, it will be that, yeah, a call by you via Singer for radical distinctiveness, and a notion that actually is the project, and that being fully proud and sort of fully in your face and provocative in a certain way might be might be what especially people of marginalized identity need to do. So I want to thank you so much for coming and bringing that to us. You've left us with a lot to think about. I'll leave the room open for a little bit longer for people to chat. I want to thank you so much for coming. Is there other places? Can you tell us where else we can see you, Lipika, in future, other than at Kehillah, obviously?
Well, I mean, you know that I've interviewed Rabbi Danny Rich, and I'm doing a program on for the BBC on prison chaplaincy, so faith-based rehabilitation, and it's going out on the 14th of May.
Oh.
So that's a half-hour program, and I'll also be speaking to Chalk Valley History Festival in June.
Amazing.
So I would love you to. I mean, I'm sure that probably will also be online simultaneously. And then immediately I can think of. I'm speaking in Oxford at guided retreat seminar. It's just like a weekend of, you may have heard of this, of discussions, seminars, and so that's the last weekend of June. So yeah.